What are some of the darker effects COVID-19 has had that we don't talk about? Cognitive decline, even in those who aren't infected. Lack of stimulation, excessive stress, etc. People's attention spans and memories are shot. Their reasoning ability is dimmed. Self included. I was literally just having this conversation with my partner. My ability to self-start at anything is completely destroyed after almost 2 years of stress, worry, and lack of meaningful social interactions. I'm immediately paralyzed by my to-do list at work. My hobbies feel like chores. I can't focus long enough to get those 2 pages of the book I desperately want to read. I feel like I'm living in my own personal Groundhog Day hell. Edit. Wow friends, was not expecting these awards. Thank you kind internet strangers. People that didn't get COVID but do have ongoing health problems were less able and less likely to get the ongoing care that they would normally get. What you're seeing now is an uptick in 911 calls and ER visits because their conditions worsened and now have become medical emergencies. The health crisis that this pandemic caused is much farther reaching than just the people that got COVID. Source: I'm a firefighter. In my opinion, the darker effect is definitely the people with other illnesses that couldn't get treatment because of the lockdown rules. Many people couldn't get life-extending radiation treatment and are no longer around. Somehow I feel there could have been a better alternative to no treatment. Absolutely this. When they say elective surgeries are being cancelled, they don't mean cosmetic surgeries. People aren't getting mitral valve replacements and other very serious surgeries. I've lost one friend to a stroke because his surgery was postponed, M42, and another to cardiac arrest because he couldn't get his old pacemaker swapped out, M35. As a dental student, I see lots of people who neglected their teeth who otherwise might not have regular cleanings, checkups, not returning for definitive treatment and having a temp crown on for 18 months. This is partly the fault of dental offices canceling appointments indefinitely and never rescheduling the patients, but also partly patient fear of catching COVID from other patients, etc. TLDR: more people's teeth are more fucked up. Edit. As some astute observers have pointed out, some other factors include being home all day means eating more frequently, don't eat between meals y'all, and more sugary diets. Lack of a pre-work routine means oral hygiene habits are poor. And we all are more stressed and have been clenching, grinding our teeth down to nubbins. 911 dispatcher for a small town here. The amount of domestic violence calls I have taken has skyrocketed. It's beginning to seriously drag me down and exhaust me. I also help the local programs try to get food to families with kids. I broke down when I realized some kids only get food at school. I work as a school bus driver, and it has been an interesting experience thus far. The pandemic closed things down in March, and lasted into summer, when a lot of kids would usually have summer school. I had been out of work since March when schools had closed their doors, and was eager for some kind of work to do. Over the summer, many drivers including myself would come to work, get our bus ready, head to a school and pick up numerous coolers full of school-grade lunches, and head into various neighborhoods, church parking lots, and apartment complexes to hand out these lunch kits to kids who were not able to get their meals from school because of the pandemic. It pained me more than I had ever felt being a school bus driver when many of these kids would come up to the bus alone, and thank me for bringing them the one meal they would have for the day, before walking back home and often sharing what they had with siblings who were too young to come out. I gave out extras to the kids I knew were taking care of others, and thankfully we never had a day where we ran out of lunches to give to them. But I will never forget the hardships I observed of these kids and how much extra perspective the pandemic gave me into their day-to-day lives. This is a bit embarrassing because I'm in my 20s, but lockdown made me develop hemorrhoids. It's common among people who sit a lot for their work, and because of lockdown I get less exercise, and here I am with FCK and hemorrhoids on top of all the stress and chaos of the pandemic. Edit. RIP my inbox. I haven't heard a lot of people talk about it, but I still have survivor's guilt. The guy in recovery next to me passed away in the middle of the night. We had our hospital dinner hours before and we had a great conversation. As just before we went to sleep he said, "Hey, I really like you man, once we get out of here let's get actual dinner." I said absolutely, anything would be better than this stuff. Later that night, I heard his machine go off, we were blocked by curtains, and heard the nurses and doctors come in and wheel him out saying to get the defibrillator. I don't remember much, but that has stuck with me mainly because I thought I was next. I figured I'd never see my wife, family, or friends ever again, so I was trying my best to come to terms. I didn't find the peace everyone says you find near death. Anyways, after 47 days 10 in the ICU, I was able to leave. Year and a half later I'm here telling you all about my experience. I do still think of that man often. I don't remember his name. I don't know what he looked like. I just know our conversations helped us through. Edit. Thank you all for your kind words and awards. Yep, and there's going to be knock-on effects from this for years to come. Those parts are hard to come by because they weren't being produced in sufficient numbers for perhaps a whole year or more. Since the manufacturers weren't manufacturing, a huge number of them went out of business permanently. Every downstream supply chain that relies on any product that isn't being produced is royally screwed, which could cause them to go out of business, and then the companies they supply to, and so on and so forth, until all the dominoes are down. How much hearing impaired people were affected? My mother, who wears hearing aids, also depends on reading lips, especially in louder, busier areas. Hearing aids can have trouble sorting through complex noise situations. You can imagine what happened when everyone covered their mouths. Now she's more isolated than ever. Since then, I've ran into a coworker who is also hearing impaired but doesn't want to return to office because while she can read lips some Zoom, she won't be able to if we mask up in person. They were an invisible casualty of this pandemic. Edit. The response to this has been more than I expected. If anyone has links to their favorite organizations to donate to help the hard of hearing, please share them. I hope the stories below help us all be a little more empathetic to each other. Thanks. Scroll down looking for this one. I feel relatively certain that supply chain disruptions are basically going to be the norm from now on. I work in a field adjacent to supply chain management, and there's an entire orthodoxy that's been built up over decades about the value of leaning out your supply chain and minimizing inventory costs and using just-in-time delivery. All of this is built upon a set of assumptions about the world that COVID exposed to be a complete unsustainable fabrication. We're going to be dealing with the after effects of COVID on the global supply chain for years after the pandemic eases, and we'll end up dovetailing right into climate change upending norms all over again. Some companies and industries might adjust eventually, but you're overturning decades of established practice. It's going to be in fits and starts. As a personal consumer, I think it's better to hedge your bets and just expect there to be ongoing, unpredictable disruptions in the availability of oddly specific things from now on. It's obviously not as dark as the long-term effects of COVID on health or education, but the impact is going to be just as widespread. This is so true. My brother had cancer and started chemotherapy. He doesn't drive and lives in a small town. I went and drove him the 35 miles to his treatments. I had to wait in my Jeep for 5 hours or so in the middle of winter in Minnesota because everything was locked down. It was hard to get things like tests done. It was way harder for him than when I had the same cancer and treatment regimen 25 years earlier. People who were furloughed had time to realize they hate their job. I can only speak in service industry, but it feels like a soul-crushing job more than ever. I used to love bartending, and now I feel trapped by it. Everyone I talk to seems to feel the same. The money doesn't seem worth it anymore. Guests are worse and more entitled than ever, and staff shortages have made shifts harder and longer. It has left me with a sense of hopelessness, as it's the only career I've known, but I cannot imagine a future continuing to do it. It got so bad where I worked. They're pinching pennies so much that they made the call to continue working despite a gas leak 2 feet away from an open flame. I confronted the manager about it and he screamed at me and told me to leave if I didn't feel safe. I called the emergency hotline at the gas company and they evacuated the whole building and it was fixed in an hour. They ended up firing me and I was one of their best employees among a skeleton crew. Yes, I reported them to OSHA. No, it probably won't do anything. Yes, the restaurant was filled with customers. Yes, the gas worker's meter went off as soon as he opened the door. No, they didn't give a reason for firing me even though I requested one. Yes, I know it's illegal to operate a business during an explosion hazard. No, there's not much you can do about it. Edit. Hey everyone, I really appreciate the kind words of support. There is one more option that I can do which is call the whistleblower hotline. I have 30 days since the incident to do so. I haven't decided if I'm going to yet. To be honest, I was already suffering from severe depression before this due to some life events, and this has honestly just kind of shattered whatever faith in humanity I had. I really want to help, but I actually think I don't have any mental energy left to do anything outside of the things I need to do. I'm fine and I'll get by, but man, life can be very hard sometimes. If there's one thing I've learned in my 27 years of life is that people are by and large self-serving. They risked probably 70 people's lives for probably $300 of profit. But the GM didn't want to lose his job because his higher-ups would fire him if he didn't comply. It's all just eating each other's shit so you don't lose your tiny bit of job security, even if that means people working in a potential bomb. Shit is stupid. The staff shortage at my job has made me want to quit more than ever. I used to get regular breaks with multiple coworkers in my department, and now I'm lucky if it's me and one other person I know. Quitting would make it even worse for those coworkers I would leave, but if it isn't tempting, I'm not getting paid enough and everything is more expensive since COVID. Edit for clarity. I don't work an office job, which some people have assumed. I am also still working on my degree, which makes it even more difficult to try and find a new job that works with my class schedule and that I'll get enough hours in. I'm not wanting to go to retail either, so my options as an undergrad are pretty limited. Also, as for expenses, rent, groceries, and gasoline are much more expensive since COVID started. All I have gotten is a 65-cent raise per hour. It would pain you all to know how much I make per hour. I agree. I understand how someone with a maintenance or janitorial job cannot work from home. But 90% of my work is on the laptop, and when we were closed to public it made zero impact on my performance. Yet, as soon as we could be back in office, we were, because our customers need to see us. Meanwhile, everyone above me on the ladder is working remote from their summer homes in other states, and nobody has even been in our corporate office for 18 months, and it's a bit frustrating. My memory is trashed. I clicked on a movie in a recent downloads and said, "You want to watch this?" My hubby was freaked because apparently we had watched this 2 days prior. He went through it with me scene by scene, but I have no memory of it. I now frequently forget the door code in work. My mom is really going through some stress right now, and I speak to her daily. Sometimes I forget the people she's talking about, entire conversations, and I feel like an awful daughter. Never had a memory issue before. This isn't on purpose, it's only happened since I had COVID, from which I was very ill for about a month, despite being 29 at the time, now 30, but my doctor's response is that nothing can be done because no one is researching the long-term memory effects yet. So I am just in limbo. Managers give me jobs to do and work, and before I finish one I forget the other thing and everyone thinks I am an idiot. Having COVID fog isn't a legit thing yet, so most people just think I am an idiot. I have 2 degrees and I now struggle in a mediocre job. Lost my previous job, where I had responsibility to the pandemic. It sucks. An idiot I work with, one of those "if I think this it's true" types, was arguing with me that COVID eliminated all domestic abuse cases. His rationale was, "Think about it, you can't go out so they know they can't get away if the cops come. Lockdown has stopped all abuse." He is the type that is too stupid to argue with. I am a therapist working in bereavement and attached to a local hospice. The past 18 months have been brutal. The amount of trauma and instances of stalled or complicated grief responses I have seen have definitely increased. Not being able to mourn the death of a loved one properly, not being able to be with them as they die, not being able to visit them, not being able to hold proper funerals, not being able to hug each other or sit near each other when saying goodbye. These things are massively increasing the difficulties in people being able to process their loss and grief, even when the person has not died of COVID-19. We rely on these rituals, these mourning processes, these avenues of community support, to help us come to terms with and cope with loss. So many of these comforts have been denied to people, both to those dying and those who are being left behind. It has been a grueling and incredibly depressing 18 months in this field, and I believe that we are going to see a huge amount of unresolved trauma and complicated grief over the next few years. Edit, grammar. Edit 2. I just wanted to say that I'm blown away by the response my reply has had. Thank you for the upvotes and awards. But in particular, thank you for sharing your own stories with me. I don't know if I will be able to keep up with all of the replies and messages, but I wanted to say that I will do my best to read them and respond where I am able. In a lot of ways, the incredible response to my comment shows how much we have in common, collectively, as we make our way through this pandemic. So many stories of trauma and sadness and grief. Thank you for sharing them here. I believe that healing can begin when we share the burdens we carry, and when we feel truly heard. For anyone struggling with their grief, please reach out to support groups or organizations that may be able to help you. While demand for therapeutic services is at an all-time high, we are doing our best to help as many people as we can. While grief itself is devastating, the complications of trying to mourn during a pandemic can lead to similar responses to PTSD, like intrusive thoughts and images, preoccupation with the person who has died or the manner of death, low mood and depression, anxiety, hypervigilance, and feelings of isolation or dissociation. Grief is inevitably painful, but stalled grief can be overwhelming. Please reach out for help. You don't have to do this alone. For those, like me, who are in the helping professions, such as carers, therapists, healthcare workers, etc., your mental health is as important as the people you help. Vicarious trauma and burnout are real, and you will also need support. We are dealing with the collective trauma. The only experience that this can be likened to is a war. We will need each other to make it through this. Thank you again, X. My granny died from COVID last November. The hospital she was in for 2 weeks before she passed wouldn't let us go in to see her. When we knew she wasn't going to make it, all they could do was set up an iPad in front of her so we could video chat with her while she was dying. Even though we couldn't go in, 7 of us sat in 2 cars right outside in the hospital parking lot so we could be as close as we could to her. I don't feel like I've gotten the right closure still since she's passed. I didn't get to hug and kiss her goodbye. I still find myself about to take my phone out to call or text to ask a question about something I'm cooking or baking. Or I'll pass her memorial candle with her picture on it and I'll realize she's really gone. I really miss my granny. My cousin killed himself last May. The family only just had a memorial for him, over a year later. That lack of closure killed me, mentally. Couldn't see family to grieve with them. Even when they finally had the service, I couldn't get to it. I wound up having a memorial on my own because I needed it. I needed that, almost, permission to grieve and say goodbye. And I know I am far from alone on this horrific experience. No, you're not. My mom died in a nursing home in New York City March 2020 from COVID. As it was happening, I was dodging COVID deniers. Not only could I not attend the funeral, the cemetery was closed to all visitors for months after. Due to other unforeseen circumstances, I have yet to even see my mother's grave. Edit. I can't respond to each of you, but I really wish I could hug you all. Thank you all so much for the kind words and also for sharing your story. We need to share and we need to know we're really not alone. Thanks, lovely humans. My husband's mother and brother both died just before everything locked down. They didn't die from COVID, but they were the last of my husband's immediate family. Everything shut down the day after the memorial service, which sadly was my son's 16th birthday. It seems odd to say this, but for the sake of my husband's well-being, I am glad they died when they did. The circumstances were odd enough as it was, and I think my husband would have had a more difficult time without having the funeral. That said, my husband drives around with the ashes of his 2 brothers and his mother in the trunk of the car. I have presented him with several different options to place them, but he has low-key rejected them by saying, "Thanks. I'll think about it," and the ashes stay in his car. I have tried to get him into grief counseling, but he won't go. In the beginning, all these animals were snatched up from the shelters for adoption or foster in my area. Now people are going back to work and school and don't have time for these animals. Some didn't really think about what pet ownership would be like and no longer want them since they're out of the cute baby stage. People are dying from COVID and families are sending their animals to the shelter. People are losing their homes and need to move in with family or into a new place that doesn't allow their pet. They can't afford housing, let alone food. Eviction moratorium schmorian. People were getting kicked out of their places still. I've heard many say they couldn't get their pet fixed because the vets were closed, so they accidentally got pregnant and no longer know what to do with the offspring. Shit sucks. Not op, but fellow educator. The first category would be physical or sexual abuse, verbal abuse, threats against physical safety, constant screaming or cruel insults, and, more rarely, emotional abuse. I say more rare because in my experience, that's both the hardest for DCS or CPS to approve and the hardest to make sound believable on a report, as sad as that is to say. The second category would be neglect, lack of adequate food, housing, clothing, or other care. Parental drug dependency usually falls in this category, among other things. Edit because this is more visible than I thought it would be. If you want to help kids in your community, remember that, in many states, any adult with knowledge or suspicion of child abuse can make a report to the responsible agency in your state. You can remain anonymous while making your report as well. Some of the most heinous cases of abuse aren't reported by teachers, but by neighbors, family friends, fellow churchgoers, etc. Yes, I know my district absolutely struggled to actually connect with kids last year and find out what was happening at the home if teachers or staff had a bad feeling about it. We had so many ghost kids, who were signing in to live classes and completing at least some work, but who never turned their mixer cameras on and whose parents rarely, if ever, responded to outreach. It was very unsettling. Domestic abuse has increased, but another related thing that seemingly nobody is really talking about, there is an increase of children, especially those raised in non-traditional homes, for example older parents or grandparents as guardians, who are being put into the foster system or the very least into another family member's home due to COVID-related deaths. Even if they're not being put in the foster system, children are losing their parents to COVID. It is, to me, the most tragic loss. One of my employees became the legal guardian of her 16-year-old nephew when she had 3 deaths in her extended family in a year. She was a 24-year-old trying to go to college, work, and take care of her nephew. On top of that, the kid's absentee father suddenly showed up to try to take the departed mother's life insurance. I transferred to a different state before the resolution, but people used to complain to me about her being late, leaving early, or having to take off. I told them it was her personal business and the absences were all cleared with me, but never what it was all about. People really do equal shit sometimes and can't accept that other people have lives outside work. Honestly, thank you. I was working full-time, Golden Arches fast food, my senior year, 2020, and I was sexually assaulted. My rapist's family came into the lobby to order when I was working front counter and I couldn't do it. I ran to the back and had a panic attack and my general manager was too busy screaming at me to get back up to the front to take their order. I was just crying, hyperventilating, telling her that I wanted to go home and she told me I couldn't be. We were short-staffed. One of my coworkers traded positions with me so I could work back drive instead and I spent the rest of my shift on and off crying. I couldn't calm down and they wouldn't let me go home. There was another time when my period came early and my cramps were so bad that I was throwing up. I was scheduled to work night 4-11, but usually had to help close. I again couldn't leave. There was only 4 of us working that night, so I was running to the bathroom to throw up while also trying to run the front by myself. Honestly, it was a shit show the whole time I worked there, but my dad got laid off from COVID so I couldn't risk losing a job that was the only place close to my house. My daughter recently started preschool. First week, she came home with a few lice. It sucked, but we notified the teacher and took care of it. Apparently, there was a poor kid in her class who was just crawling more lice than hair and sores all along their tiny neck. Edit, I realized some people could take a poor kid to mean a kid with no money. I have no idea what this kid's family life is like. I actually don't even know which kid it was. I meant poor kid as in I felt bad for them. Me, 25 years old, gaining a handle on my depression and finally working a stable job with my own apartment just before COVID hit. I think it's time I get out of my shell and start going out to bars, clubs, lounges and see what it's all about, and maybe finally meet someone. Me, 27 years old and having spent almost 2 years completely alone locked in my apartment because I already have shitty lungs and will likely die if I catch COVID. What is a date? What is a other person? Edit, damn. I didn't expect this to get any upvotes at all. XD, I appreciate the awards, but please don't spend your money on me. Use it to better yourself or someone you love. That'd mean more to me. Virtual hugs to everyone else who can relate. We'll get through this, and get your second chance again soon. 3. Edit 2. I'm glad that so many people are able to relate with each other here. I hope it's cathartic. Also, I don't know who you are or what your story is, but I love you, random Redditor reading this comment. I really do. You're amazing and you're gonna kick ass when the world reopens. I just know it. One thing I have noticed is a load of young adults who before COVID were young enough to be young people but are now considered adults. None of them have any idea how they are meant to be or behave. My brother turned 18 a week before the lockdown here in the UK. He is now late 20, almost 21. People see his age and expect him to be a more mature adult, but really he is still an 18-year-old in his head. I really feel for that age group. They have missed some massively formative years that show you how to live and interact in an adult world. His anxiety levels are off the charts and he has gone from quite an independent young person to someone who constantly needs confirmation and validation. I'm sure it's very similar for many people his age.